You guys ready back there?
My work.
All right.
Okay.
We'll call the meeting to order. First on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to that effect?
I'll approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
No.
Seeing as none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Next is public comments. Is there anybody from the public either? I see nobody present. Is there anybody online? All right, that's easy.
Commissioner Williams on the Zoom?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Action items. First on the agenda is a public hearing on the farm and forest housekeeping text amendments. Nicole.
Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner with Deschutes County Community Development. I just wanted to double check here. It looks like our attendees are only planning commissioners and then us as staff, and noting no one in the room. So I was planning to do a very abbreviated version of the PowerPoint this evening. I'm just seeing as we don't appear to have folks who are planning to provide testimony, but just in case anyone is watching on the YouTube live stream, if you do wish to testify, you need to do that via the Zoom link, which is zoom.com/DCPC Zoom. All right, so with that, I will give just a very abbreviated version of this housekeeping text amendment public hearing. I guess, Peter, do we need to officially open the hearing using the script?
You know, I would, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director, I would go through the script and then at least to officially open the hearing as your slides will articulate. And then with the chair and the planning commission's guidance, determine how much of additional overview they need, given the fact that we had a work session just 2 weeks ago. So, but I would do the opening remarks just procedurally to make sure we're all on the same page.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is the time and place for a hearing on file number 247-25-000297-TA concerning farm and forest housekeeping text amendments. Staff will outline the hearing procedures that will be followed. All record materials are on the project website, which is bit.ly/farmforesthousekeeping. The Planning Commission will hear oral testimony, receive written testimony, and consider the testimony submitted at this hearing. The hearing is also being recorded. The Commission may make a decision on this matter today, continue the public hearing to a date certain, or leave the written record open for a specified period of time. The hearing will be conducted in the following order. Staff representing Deschutes County as the applicant will give a brief report on the issue. We will then take testimony from agencies if present and any interested persons. Following testimony, the Commission can request staff to answer any additional questions if needed. This is a hybrid public hearing with in-person and remote participation options. For in-person participants, which it appears we do not have any, if you wish to testify, please fill out a blue sign-up sheet and submit it to staff. As after your name is called, please come up to one of the tables at the front of the room before beginning testimony. Give your first name, last name, and mailing address. Remote participants, if you wish to testify, you must be logged into Zoom or have called in using the Zoom dial-in option. When the chair asks if anyone would like to testify, you'll need to use the raise hand feature to notify the Commission. To do this, you need to press the raise hand button on your computer, smart device, or if you called in, dial *9. In addition to oral testimony, you can submit written testimony during tonight's hearing. For in-person submittals, you'll hand that to me. For remote submittals, you can submit that to my email, nicole.mardell@deschutes.org. Chair and staff are responsible for conducting an orderly hearing. Any testimony or behavior which is inappropriate will be addressed and may result in that member of the public being removed from the hearing. Questions to and from the chair may be entertained at any time at the chair's discretion, although cross-examination of people testifying will not be allowed. The chair is free to decide whether or not to ask such questions of the person testifying. And so please alert the chair if you had a question of another person after being recognized. Prior to the commencement of the hearing, any party may challenge the qualifications of any commissioner for conflicts of interest. This challenge must be documented with specific reasons supported by facts. Should any commissioner be challenged, the member may disqualify himself, herself, and withdraw from the hearing or make a statement on the record of their capacity to hear and decide the issue. At this time, do any members of the commission need to set forth any information that may be perceived as a conflict of interest?
Does any commissioner have anything they'd like to disclose or state? If so, state nature. Okay,
Excellent. Does any party wish to challenge any commissioner, member of the hearings body, based on conflicts of interest?
as no challengers are present, the hearing is now open. And I would, I guess, ask the commission, since we don't have anybody from the public either present or online, do you guys wish to have a new recap, or are you good with what was presented at the last meeting?
I'm personally good with what was at the last meeting. I feel like we got a really good idea of what's being proposed and what our role is in that. But if anyone has questions or wants to hear it again, I'm fine.
I guess, go ahead.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Just for my own understanding, there was something that I had a hard time wrapping my head around. And it was made mention a couple of times, but on the one I flagged was on page 108, talking about replacement dwellings. It's under F4, FIV. It reads, the replacement dwelling must comply with the construction provisions of section R327 of the Oregon Residential Specialty Code if the dwelling is in an area identified as extreme or high wildfire risk on the statewide map of wildfire risk described in ORS 477.490, or no statewide map of wildfire risk has been adopted.
Which I understand was just repealed.
Well, yes, but I also don't understand. So if there's a map, or if there's not a map, or there's a map that hasn't been adopted, I guess I'm just confused by the language and what it's actually trying to say.
So I apologize. I may have missed the page you were looking for. Was this under-
Page 108 under F.
Okay.
F.
Section is this under in terms of the code?
I'm sorry, it's on page 12. I'm sorry, I'm looking at, it says 108 on my, and it's under
Oh, okay.
Gulf.
So this is, so my understanding is that you're referring to, it's under the subheader conforming rule changes. And then this is it's highlighted in red in your.
It's in red, yes.
Okay, so I wanted to note that what you're reading from, this is an attachment. This is a note of the LCDC rule changes. I believe, so we've actually taken this code verbatim out of our local code. Instead of copying, pasting this into our code, we're directly referring to statute. Part of the reason why is because there is some, there are some unclear direction with the wildfire maps being repealed. So I believe that section will likely be amended by the state. I don't believe that there's anything that we need to do. But I believe generally it was, intended to be complying with wildfire risk as part of that mapping process. But I'd look to maybe Will or Peter if you had any other information.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Your planning manager, Will Groves. Nicole has correct. So currently the statute in ORS 215 has language for replacement dwellings that relate to the fire map. And that language is still in effect until the governor signs or vetoes that. Of course, they're going through legislative processes right now. The anticipation is that language will be removed. And so one of the advantages of the approach that we've taken, historically, we have incorporated language into our code from statute and repeated it verbatim. And when state statute changes, as it appears it's about to, we then have orphaned code in our local code that's a repeating statute that no longer exists. So in the current version of the code that we've proposed before you today, there's a roll-up that says our local code is whatever statute says effectively. And so as to the extent that statutes changed in the current legislative session, our date to that. And so right now, that fire mapping confusion continues to exist as of today, but 2 weeks from now, probably not. And under this proposed approach to our code will also sync to that immediately, as opposed to requiring a separate effort to make that update.
So would this need to come back next year as housekeeping?
Not a bit, because what it says, what our code says is it says, when you're doing a replacement dwelling, do whatever statute says. So to the extent that statute updates, our code just points to that statute, which is, the legislature tinkers with every year, and we will stay in sync because we incorporate by reference rather.
Okay, that's why it says as described in ORS.
Yes.
So if ORS goes away, then it's not described and,
Exactly.
okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So
Glad to help.
any other questions? Okay,
Very good. Well, at this point then, seeing as there isn't a need for an additional update on the staff report, I just wanted to note that we still have not received any agency or public comments to date. And the Planning Commission has a few options today. You could choose to continue the hearing to a date and time certain, close the hearing, leave the written record open, close the hearing and set a date for deliberations, or close the hearing and commence deliberations. Again, seeing as it doesn't appear we have any Zoom attendees or folks here in person, I think staff would recommend the Planning Commission close the hearing and commence deliberations.
that would be my inclination. Anybody have any other thoughts?
I would agree.
Okay,
You like a motion?
well, do we need a motion or can I go ahead and just do it as a chair? Or here's what I'll do. The chair would entertain a motion to close the record or close the hearing and commence deliberations.
So moved. That was easy.
Yeah. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we'll begin deliberations. Is there any comments or deliberations, or is somebody ready for a motion to adopt and move it forward?
I'm
Let's
ready.
adopt-
Okay, is there a second?
I will second.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor to adopt the recommendations and forward them to the board. Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Carries. That was easy.
That was the fastest
I know.
process deliberations we've ever had. Record.
You did such a great job. It made it easy.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
All right, thank you. So next item on the agenda, Dark Skies.
My official Dark Skies outfit.
Ah, that's the
All
way-
Nice.
all black.
Good evening again, Planning Commission. Will Groves here on behalf of Tanya Salzman, who is enjoying her evening elsewhere with a Dark Skies text amendment work session. This is, of course, file 24725000377 TA. The full project website and record are available at bit.ly/Deschutes Dark Skies. A little background and overview for you here. Why are we talking about Dark Skies? Of course, as you have learned over the course of many years, light pollution affects sleep, wildlife, and rural character. And Central Oregon has a growing interest in protecting that night sky. Dark Skies International has advocated that the county promote best practices for outdoor lighting. And, there's been a shared interest between the Planning Commission board, the public in modernizing old 1994 rules to reflect new science, technology, and values. There's some regional momentum for Dark Skies. City of Sisters is now certified as an international Dark Skies community. And you'll see slide, there's a variety of other jurisdictions and places that have taken that on as well. And the proposal that you'll see before you here today takes tested ideas from these models, especially the City of Sisters. We borrowed extensively in this draft code that's before you. So community interest so far, of course, in 2022 and 2023, we had panels with experts and farmers and educators, and the feedback supported light shielding and simplified regulation with more education as a focus. Also, the BOCC directed updates focused on voluntary compliance, and they had concerns about costly enforcement efforts. Some more background, of course, the county is not aiming for dark skies certification through this process, and instead is seeking to adopt best practices based on public input and the process we're going through today. And a significant portion of this will be outreach and education. So Tanya is simultaneously working on outreach and education packages, brochures, pamphlets, connecting building people who are going through building permit processes to information, websites, things like that. So lots of communication. So what the code currently has is the lighting rules are dependent on the bulb type and wattage. There's an emphasis on partial versus full shielding based on that brightness, and there's a number of exceptions. And again, it's focused on shielding, not light direction or this notion of light trespass. So the legislative approach. So we're looking here to balance the policy with real world limitations. Of course, the code, we want it to be easy to understand and apply. It's important to note that building inspectors don't review our lighting. So this is something that has to work without that step, without sort of an on-property per light inspection. Of course, enforcement's proved rare and difficult. It's tough to get photos, timing, and access for enforcement purposes. So what you're seeing here at the outset is simpler rules which are streamlined for compliance and education. So the amendments themselves, again, simplified rules. So one standard applies to all non-exempt fixtures, downcast, shielded, no trespass. Updated definitions. So we've added for clarity definitions of downcast, certainly some concerns about string lighting. We removed the complex tables that have the old wattage-based rules, and we've consolidated sections. So there were duplicative prohibition and sign lighting rules, and those have all been merged into exemptions. So the current approach is that by default, all lighting is subject to the downcast, shielded, and no trespass provisions, and to the extent that there's ifs, ands, and buts, those sit now in the exemptions section. And so again, the amendment summary is, the purpose statement has been revised based on prior input from dark sky representatives. So what you're going to see is in the code right now, a purpose statement that acknowledges the broader goals of dark sky, at the same time recognizing that we're not going to regulatorily, under this package as proposed, hit all of those targets. But again, acknowledging as part of that goal of education and outreach that there are, that there are a variety of things, including things like color, temperature, of the lighting that can be important, but are not included in this regulatory package. And so there's non-regulatory guiding principles that are included in this proposal. So what's changing? The old prohibition section has been removed, as I mentioned, and moved to the exemption section. And exemptions are new and reworked definitions of string lighting and publicly owned lighting and searchlights, for example. But there's a number of things in the code, and I think that's probably the most interesting part of what we're doing here. What's exempted and how is where a lot of these ordinances in various jurisdictions do their heavy lifting. So next steps, of course, you've got a public hearing coming up at your next regularly scheduled meeting. And Tanya's the contact for that at Tanya Salzman at deschutes.org. That I am available for any questions.
So I have one quick, you said the building department would not get involved in why?
They are tasked under state law with certain specific activities under the building code. And so when we've interacted with them, they've said, they've been very clear that they don't have the resources, the training to be involved with that. We certainly could advocate that there is at time of building inspection of the lights. What that would lead to, and I don't want to lean on this either way, I just at the outset, there were some concerns about this, would be that you would be, let's say that we wanted to have an at time of building per light inspection, you would need to allocate someone to that. So you'd have to have, a process and fees and someone trained to go out to look at that. And there'd been some hesitancy, at least initially from the board and the building, particularly the building inspectors, at adding that duty But if you wanted to advocate for that, or any other regulatory perspective, any other regulatory action that required additional manpower effectively, more FTEs, it's certainly within your purview.
I guess, I mean, there's building inspectors out on a regular basis looking at the houses. I mean, it wouldn't take any extra time to notice where the lights are located and when they're doing a plan review. I mean, it only takes a few minutes. I sit on a design review committee, and we have probably the strictest dark sky provisions in the state. And that's one of the things that we look at and warn people on every building or every plan that's submitted is that when we do a final inspection, we just walk the perimeter of the property and look for whether or not the lights comply. I guess I'm not seeing a big burden to the planning or the building department.
Yeah, and that was, that aligned, I thought initially as well that this was going to be, a small ask. And the feedback I got was that it was likely not a small ask, but this isn't to preclude you from advocating for that. So to the extent that, that you or this commission says, hey, we should do at time of for light inspections, I can carry that forward to the Board of Commissioners, and we'll have our talk about what the challenges are, resources are. But at least initially in those conversations, there was significant concern about add-ons, regulatory obligations.
And if I may,
I-
I'm sorry.
Just a quick follow-up question to that. Is it possible they didn't realize that this is going to be, it's going to be made a lot, well, it's being proposed that this would be a lot simpler. So the comment about they don't have the training caught my attention. I think if what you've summarized briefly here is something that the board wants to adopt, then it's just three things really, just downcast, shielded, and not trespass. So like it doesn't have like color, temperature, and fixtures and like all these technical things that they would have to like research and learn about. I'm just wondering if they understood that it might be a fairly short inspection of the light, not like a really lengthy training process.
We had made clear kind of what the direction, maybe, did you have some input on this?
Well, if I may, and we can certainly, at the time of the public hearing in 2 weeks, give more context. I was going to offer that the building inspectors, again, are looking at, the kind of the fundamentals, right? Structural, mechanical, plumbing, electrical. And if I had to make an educated guess, when there's final occupancy, they're looking for those big ticket related matters. And it may be that not all they don't have the light fixture on the exterior of the home yet, but the county can still offer a certificate of occupancy. It can give that final inspection. And so now the follow-up would be, well, they could just go back out there and do another inspection when the light fixtures are installed. And I think it's a slippery slope. I don't want to speak on behalf of the building official, but if it was as easy as the chair and Commissioner Karras were noting, of course we would do it. But I just want to recognize the slippery slope that comes into it. You on a tangential note, I can remember, there was a time when in the urban environment, street trees needed to be planted in place before final occupancy. And that would be another well, the building inspectors are just out there and they should just check to make sure that the tree is upright and planted. And it's an add-on. And I think it'll be important for the building division to communicate through Tanya the circumstances that go into a final inspection. But as Will noted, you are well within your purview to elevate this as something that should be inspected. I noted in the materials that there's a number of items that are stamped on the plans. Did you see that part where there's the plans that are submitted and final that dictate the requisite improvement, the structure, there are some of those items that are not inspected, but are noted on the plans that it's an obligation for the contractor and ultimately the property owner to abide by. So this isn't under that framework, this isn't the only issue under the status quo that wouldn't be subject to a final inspection. So I offer those imperfect remarks as well.
So is it out of line to ask that somebody from the building department attend the hearing and
Sure.
be able to
Absolutely.
address those concerns and
Absolutely.
explain why we shouldn't add more work to them?
Absolutely. I think it could be both. I think it'd be important to have something in the record as a follow-up based on the work session comments, and we can certainly respectfully request that Randy Scheid and or Krista Appleby, the assistant building official, be available to answer questions that you may have.
You know, having been through plan review processes and inspections, I see zero extra time involved in taking a look at the lighting. So I'd love to hear their explanation as to why it's going to be burdensome. So
Yeah.
any other?
Glad to make that connection and, you know, a presumption that they would likely be available to attend the hearing, but at minimum, you would expect some sort of response in writing to the extent that they weren't available for this. I definitely want to chase down this issue, you know, to something that you had pointed out before, you know, for light trespass in particular, that it helps to do that inspection after dark, I think, or had I misunderstood that previously in the work that you do at Aspen Lakes when you're doing the light inspection? Do you do that?
We don't necessarily do it after dark. We actually just, I mean, they're small lots, they're an acre,
Sure. So
but we physically walk the perimeter, and if we can see any light, even a light fixture, the reflective portion of a light fixture, the house gets rejected.
that's good to know. I thought I'd understood.
We
you.
don't, we look for, I mean, sometimes we'll ask them to turn them on, but you can still see them in the daylight. But it's mostly a matter of our definition of a light source includes the reflective portion of a fixture. So, I mean, if your light is not shielded enough that if we can see even part of the fixture, it doesn't get a final.
Oh, that's helpful. And again, as with all this code here, we've set a starting spot without a strong leaning on this, and we had asked the building official and had some feedback. So glad to continue that discussion.
I guess, I mean, everybody else may have a different opinion. My personal opinion is there's no reason to go down this road if there's not some sort of regulatory process.
I have a slightly different opinion than that. I would like to see, well, I'm not going to say what I'd like to see, but I do see a point in continuing down the process either way, because right now, if it's complaint driven, we have great neighbors now, everything's good, but since personally have had an experience where we have filed a complaint about a light trespass situation, it would be nice if folks in that position could have something, have the ordinance updated to include those types of situations, which is what's being proposed. So even if it wasn't an inspection process, it could still be a complaint-driven enforcement process of some kind. Yeah. Yeah.
Regulatory.
Yeah, but that's the current situation. So that was going to be my other question was, you did mention that the board was leaning on more educational voluntary compliance, which makes sense to me, but does that mean that this proposal would mean a shift away from complaint-driven enforcement, like we wouldn't enforce it at all anymore? Or does it mean that it would retain the existing complaint-driven enforcement process, but just with a slightly different wording of the law?
That's a great question. So this is something that's come up, that's of course, regulations and enforcement happen as a pair. We'd be asked to think about those regulations. In terms of enforcement, the anticipation, the Deschutes County Code Enforcement Department has a manual. And if they receive complaints, they make, good faith efforts to resolve those. There'd been some discussion about how to be efficient with this, and there's been some speculation kind of internally about maybe starting out light complaints with a mailing to the violators saying, hey, it's been identified as a complaint. Here's a brochure. Let us know if you have any questions. See if that's sufficient to do that without deploying the same resources that we would deploy to, say, an exploding septic system. But that's kind of a separate discussion. But I'd like to carry forward your perspective, and maybe in deliberations, you might talk about. It might be interesting for you to talk a little bit about what your hopes are in terms of enforcement and resources. You can imagine, so some jurisdictions that are dark sky certified have one or multiple people who this is their job. Their building permits are surcharged for an FTE who deals with, this particular issue. I'm not sure what the appetite at the board level will be for, kind of increased funding / increased activity. So trying to see what we can do with the resources we have. I think, to the prior question, that's, it seems like that's a resource that we have as a building inspection, but we'll learn more about that. But in terms of the enforcement, that's an ongoing conversation with the board and the code enforcement department over time. But we had thought a little bit about trying some innovative ways to communicate with people with potential violations without using the full cumbersome, time-consuming, and expensive mechanism of code enforcement, at least as the opening salvo.
Commissioner Altman, did you have something?
I think Commissioner Hovkamp was
Oh.
first. Did you have a question?
No.
Oh,
I thought I saw a hand over here.
Thought I saw your hand. So my question is about the greenhouse light fixtures. That seems to be just gone. No greenhouses can do whatever they want, or
So as set up right now, this would sit in exemptions, and this would be exempted under exemption. Where is it? There's kind of accepted farm practices. Let's see. Farming practices and forest practices, and where did it go? Oh, that's a good question.
I mean, if you're looking at page 127, it does say, and I put a question mark there that it was unclear. Item J says farming practices and forest practices, permanent installations must conform to the requirements of this ordinance, but it was unclear. It seems there's maybe some sort of circular reference
Yeah,
that I'm
maybe
missing.
said more clearly, what that's intending to, Tanya and I were framing it, is the notion is that farming practice and forest practices are exempt. But if you have a permanent installation, so for example, let's say I have a barn where I keep my horses, and I put permanent lights up on it, that it would be expected to conform to the regulation. But things, for example, if you were harvesting at night or doing some work and you had up temporary lighting associated with that, or other farming practices that were defined in ORS, I think we've got this back at the beginning where we define farm and forest practices that point back to a code definition. But the intention there is that that they would generally be exempt, and greenhouses would be exempt. But the permanent installations would be not exempt from this. And so that's a place that may need some refinement.
Oh, Commissioner Calvin.
Question. So my understanding when I first came to me was that this would be like educational and trying to promote best practices. Then when Mr. Cyrus brought up, there would actually be like thank you. A building permit inspection. Now I'm like, all right, we actually have like, so would it be like new construction would then have to abide by certain standards, and then construction prior to now would be voluntary?
So as it's set up right now, and you're asking a great question. This is another lever that you get to pull on. This sits under 1510-060, and it talks about nonconformance. And the notion is that all outdoor light fixtures installed prior to the date are exempt. So if you had existing light fixtures, those are exempt. But if you're going to replace them, you're expected to bring them up to standard, and that you have there's a 5-year sunset. So 6 years after this is adopted, all lighting that's in the county is expected to come up to the standard of no light trespass, downcast, shielded. And so that was something that's carried over from the existing code, and we've confirmed with legal counsel that appears to be something that's lawful, but it's definitely the horizon over which. Is it 5 years? Is it that we really just mean to exempt? If you put it in, maybe we don't want to make anybody go back and redo it unless they're doing replacements or new constructions. It's a very fertile place for discussion and thought.
So if my home has a sconce, because I just went through and replaced some like
Mhm.
exterior lighting on my house. If my home has like a sconce lighting on the house and it has some upward shine,
Mhm.
in 5 years, I need to remove that and replace it with a shielded light
That's
or a
that would
downcast
be
light.
correct under the current
And if-
formulation of the code.
And, but the person, the entity that lets me know or enforces it is my neighbor.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to be like crystal clear
I
on.
think ideally, you think about dark skies, the overall goal, we're trying to catch this right. But like so much of the code, the effective enforcement mechanism is that if your neighbor doesn't care, then there's effectively, no enforcement. We're not gonna, unless you advise and the board recommends, and we send somebody driving around at night to look for these. That would be a real change in policy and procedure from our current code enforcement process.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, into the Planning Commission, I think and I see Mark Stockham, Commissioner Stockham's hands up. I guess just to finish this train of thought, I think it'll be helpful and will through Tanya can engage our building official to understand kind of the availability, the demands that are placed on our building inspection team. As well, I think it's going to be important to communicate to the Planning Commission, ultimately the board, the capacity that we have with code enforcement. And for the code enforcement, we have 4 code enforcement officers, and Will noted a code enforcement manual. And no surprise, the priorities are eminent public health and safety issues. And so we don't see a lot of lighting violations. I think that's noted in the report. And so to the extent that there's a complaint, Commissioner, Kelly's, we've fast forward 6 or 7 years, the response time, we need to be honest about what it means to be found in violation. And I think, Will talked about some techniques, a correspondence, a communication. We're hoping that would be the most effective way of handling that violation. We certainly, and I think you'll likely hear this in 2 weeks, we know we have members of the community that are passionate and understand the numerous benefits that dark skies present or represent in a community. As we get closer towards implementation, if the board wants to adopt this ordinance, it puts the department, me, the building official and others in the respectful position to just acknowledge where our priorities are as a department when we talk about the various tasks that the building division has to undertake, as well as code enforcement. So Will's remarks are duly noted. The board could decide that they want to prioritize dark skies in a way that we haven't in the recent past. The format of this current draft, though, was based on I just feel like it's worth reiterating. It's based on the direction that we heard from the board, 12 to 24 months ago, which was not to be overly regulatory, emphasize education. And in fact, Will, you mentioned to me early this afternoon that Tanya, as she's overseeing this text amendment, is also going to be working on some educational materials and outreach. So I share that with you. This is rare where we introduce a text amendment and the first thing at a work session is the department is telling you, we don't have a lot of resources for this. And whereas normally the farm and forest improvement text amendments, we're duties assigned. We're going to figure out how to make this work. This is one of those projects where it puts us in a bit of an uncomfortable situation because it hasn't been a priority. And it generates a kind of an initial response of why, and we can certainly provide more of the why, so the Planning Commission during your deliberations can make informed recommendations. And I will emphasize again, you don't have to lean on the Community Development Department's position. It's totally okay to go against the grain, so to speak. But I'm acknowledging that it is putting us in this kind of unusual position.
Hey, Commissioner Stockamp.
Yeah, a question, and it's related to kind of the public notification process. I know there's procedure that planning staff follows. Just looking at what was prepared, because it looks like there's been 2 panel discussions, one in February 2022, and then another one in April 2023 that had quite a few organizations involved, like International Dark Sky, COBA, Code Enforcement. I was just curious if I just want to reiterate that I hope it's a very thorough process for invitation for this public hearing, because it's been advocated for many years. And I'm just hoping that we have a very engaging discussion in 2 weeks on July 10th. So I was kind of curious, have people like International Dark Sky been notified, or was there even like a past email list? Because, for example, I participated early on in that Deschutes 2040 comprehensive plan back in 2022, and then I was receiving email updates constantly. So I was just curious if there were any additional like email resources that the county had to just notify people that it's been on planning staff's mind for a while, and we finally have a public hearing on it. So just hoping for a good, thorough discussion in 2 weeks.
Yeah, great question, Commissioner. So Tanya has sent out kind of an informal notice to people who participated that we've captured their email previously. I'm on the CC on that, and I've to date, some of the Dark Skies representatives, members of Dark Skies International, have responded back. Some will be available, some will be out of town, some plan to write something. So of the people that we've contacted, I've only received kind of some chatter from that direction. But just we did, where we captured emails previously, we've sent those out again.
And
Right.
one thing, if I may, just value added to Commissioner Stockamp's acknowledgement. If Tanya hasn't done so already, we may want to reach out to, maybe this happens organically anyway, with Eric Brion and
That's occurred as well.
yeah, great. So we have, Eric Brion is our kind of social media employee, who's a guru, who's a specialist who, uses multiple forms of social media to announce these forthcoming public hearings. So, yeah, thank you for just reiterating. Nice to note it on the record. So, and of course, there's no set schedule. The Planning Commission, you'll have one hearing at least. And if you certainly in the past have continued hearings, this is an important topic, and it's duly noted. It's been on our work plan. Former Chair Karas, has seen this for quite some time. And we want to make sure that there's ample opportunity for people to share their perspectives. And we know the middle of July is probably not if you're going to schedule a public hearing, it's probably not the perfect date because it's the heart of summer. So we look to the Planning Commission, how to proceed once you have that initial hearing.
So, Commissioner, did you have something more?
Yeah, just one other thing to add. And since we're talking about sort of piggybacking on your comment about your neighbors are sort of in charge of enforcing it, I think that's really well put. And then also pointing out that even if the county were to do nothing to enforce things, it makes a big difference to your neighbor when you can point to something in writing and say, hey, like this is actually against the law. And most people have a respect for the law. And so that puts it not like, well, I don't like your light. Well, I like my light. It gives you a bit of a moral high ground to say, well, but this is what our elected officials have decided, and this is what's written down. So I just think that even if we don't get into enforcement at all, there's still something special about having things in writing.
If I may, to your point, certainly for code, let's say one scenario is that, you identify a neighbor that's got a bright light, you send us a complaint, we send them a letter, they don't do anything about it, you contact us again. One of the things that can happen in that scenario is the county will concede the right of private enforcement. So one of the things that can happen is we can say, look, we haven't figured out if this is legal or not, and we don't have the resources right now, or have chosen for legal reasons not to try and enforce this, but you now may. So you now, if you want to, you can take your neighbor to court, to enforce those county regulations. It sits in statute and rule about how that works. So if you had somebody doing something truly awful, for example, we've had neighbors shining holiday lights intentionally year round, pointed straight at somebody's window, as kind of neighbor hostilities. In the event that the county, in the unlikely event that the county would stand down in that situation, you would continue to have recourse to court in those extreme
Mhm.
situations.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
I just said thanks. Yeah, I appreciated that comment.
I was just kind of thinking that just some thoughts here is one is like, I love this idea that we're just kind of planting the seed and understanding that, hey, we might not have the capacity to address these problems now, but in 10 years and, the future, we're on the path makes me excited that I understand that the capacity might not be here, but I think that we have to start somewhere. And that makes me, hopeful that it's something that we don't expect to harvest this year, but we can harvest it like a Christmas tree. My other kind of thought was like, okay, how do you educate and and I was like thinking, and this is just me thinking, it's like if there was some kind of like award, not an award, but like a badge, like I am a dark sky certified home or something where people get proud of like these kinds of things, or if then you were dark side for, I was a water wise certified, I'm this certified, I'm that certified, and you have something you put in your yard. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking about how to like get people on board, and then a neighbor's like, oh, what do they have in their yard? And then, oh, I'm dark sky certified. You
Kinda
could
like
be
the
too.
Firewise certification
Yeah.
community.
100%. And then you have all these badges and you're now like a Girl Scout.
I think that's a fascinating idea. Really, so many of those fit in the realm of third parties, and Dark Skies International offers merit badges. I think one of the things that could come out of this outreach is say, look, under the county, there's some regulatory obligations. There are independent organizations that talk about more extensive best practices. You can definitely coordinate with them, get involved, go out and have a beer at the observatory. I think we would like to be without compelling, we'd like to be a link to kind of more extensive resources. We talked about linking up with Visit Oregon. They're doing tourism based on dark skies. And so, it'd be interesting to get people excited about this and also give them the ability to say, hey, I want to do more. Or, this code really doesn't think about color temperature. And I know that moth, I just heard recently, take it with a grain of salt, that moth populations can be decimated by some types of new LED lights. And so there's all sorts of things beyond maybe what we'd want to regulate here. But, people who would like to learn more, we'd love to connect with resources.
Commissioner Williams?
So just a thought, we're talking about, we don't have the resources to do tons of enforcement. We want to do more education, provide information like that. Every homeowner in the county of Deschutes gets a property tax bill in November. Nice little place to set some information, because there's always different information in our property tax bill. So, it's something you're going to read regardless. So it's just a place to plant a nugget.
Yes, certainly something we can consider. And to the extent, that the commission advocates that, we can carry that forward to the board. I know I too have had this idea about sneaking things into property tax. The cost and other factors have come up very quickly. As the floodplain manager, I've thought that maybe we could pamphleteer to all of our floodplain properties, and that was not quite as simple as I hoped, but it's also not impossible.
It could also just be one little line on the property tax bill, because there's always something on the back page that's informational. So it could just be like Deschutes.org/ ...
Yeah, for sure. I think all the outreach we can do, and we'll definitely, especially if this commission recommends that, we'll try to see what's possible in front of the board to connect that opportunity.
Actually, it's an interesting concept, but a simple way would be to put a QR code on the property tax deal that takes you to a page that gives you all the updated rules over the last year.
Yeah, that way you don't have to send a bunch of paper and people can get there quickly.
So, anyhow, any other questions?
Just got one quick
Yeah, Commissioner.
one. Thank you. Completely appreciate the proposed emphasis on education and community outreach here with the Dark Skies initiative. And I really appreciate the also the capacity limitations and sensitivities of code enforcement. Watched with interest over the years as we've gone. I recall maybe just one code enforcement officer not that many years ago, but always seems that they're always kind of behind the demand there. So completely appreciate that perspective. And I think it's okay for code enforcement staff, to weigh in here and point out that this is additional burden. However, completely agree with my colleagues up here. I wonder if those capacity limitation considerations should overly constrain text amendments. And I appreciate your thoughtful comments, Peter, that this is, a new emphasis or elevating this priority. So, I would prefer to think that new regulatory priorities drive considerations of code enforcement resources and capacity rather than vice versa. But, and in fact, to pick up on a point earlier made, I think, by Commissioner Kieras, there is a line in here. It says, notably, code enforcement staff observed during the 2023 panel that a simpler code would likely be easier to enforce. So great simplification here, which is also nice to see. A bunch of specificity and technical numbers on wattage and bulbs and stuff that's all going to be changing anyway, and it's very difficult to enforce. So apparently that was already anticipating that with a simpler code, that it might be easier to enforce. So I guess I would just like to say that I think it's an excellent point. I like Commissioner Williams' idea of including a line or two. And I do recall, I think we get a newsletter or something like that, a county newsletter, in addition to the actual bill. That's a great idea too, but just encourage staff ahead of the hearing that we'll have and then eventual deliberations. And I'm probably grading into deliberations here. My apologies for that, but to think about this notion of enforcement, because I agree with the chair that, these things assume much more importance with both the carrot of education and outreach and, the stick that it is, it is enforceable. So thank you for that.
Anybody else?
Chairman, if I could offer just one more kind of, maybe I guess it's a closing remark. I think the other, stepping back and looking at it at this opportunity from a 30,000-foot level, the opportunity, I guess I'm going back to education, but this is going to be once this gets to the board and there's a hearing, this will become newsworthy, right? So we have an opportunity, starting with the Planning Commission, there is an opportunity to elevate the importance of dark skies. And I'm presuming 2 weeks from now, you're going to hear some very articulate specialists and advocates across the disciplines that are going to underscore why this is so important. And our community needs to hear that. I mean, we've got our own logistical challenges, set that aside. This is a tremendous opportunity. It's something that the Planning Commission has been advocating for several years. And now we're about to kick off the hearing. So it's an important time to promote, dark skies and shielded lighting for those that are, tapping into the issues facing Deschutes County at the local level. So it's just acknowledging the springboard, if nothing else.
And can I,
Sure. Go ahead.
one final thing along those lines? I came on this commission, I think in March of 22. So it would have been after that first panel, but before the second panel on dark skies, because I was here for one more recent one that a lot of us were here for. Anyway, I think I might have missed that initial panel on dark skies that Chair Kieras was here for, but there's things out there I've read. I assume my colleagues have read some of them too. There's a lot of concerns about safety and night lighting. And I totally get that with street lighting and intersections and things like that. But a lot of the home security things, there's evidence or whatever, there's numbers out there that actually it promotes as many home invasions and burglaries as it discourages. That in fact, it's not really, there's not a solid grounding for it being safe to light up your house like crazy at night. It sort of provides a lot of information for burglars they can see. And anyway, I won't burden us further with that, but I encourage people if they want to do some quick research. It's pretty surprising to see that. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? Did you have anything more?
Nothing else. Thank you. I'll make sure that Tanya receives all your comments and looking forward to hopefully some vigorous public participation.
And I guess I would also point out to the commissioners that if you've got information that you want to add to the record, submit it to Tanya. So we don't end up with problems in deliberation when we're talking about something that personal knowledge that we didn't add to the record. So
Does that go, so it's sent to staff? Do we CC us or do we let staff handle that?
oh, if we CC us, it becomes a public meeting violation.
Just goes right to staff?
Correct. And staff will disseminate it.
Quick clarification question.
Sure.
My understanding is that personal experiences are like during deliberations are just personal experiences, but information regarding other people's experiences or data, facts, things like that would need to be entered into the record ahead of time.
I think you're correct. I think we can rely on our own personal stuff during the.
Like
but
I can tell a personal anecdote, but I wouldn't, if I wanted to say something like, to Commissioner Hovecamp's point about home invasions or whatever data based on that, I would need to send that study in ahead of time or say that, I need to put that scientific study into the record if I wanted to reference it during deliberations.
Be most robust, although, very low certainty. The key foul is that you're not making a decision based on something that the public's unaware of or didn't have an opportunity to rebut. So if, my cousin came up to you and like, hey, here's this picture of somebody with terrible lighting, you absolutely need to make a choice one way or another. You made a choice and you said, I'm going to choose this way and not this way because of secret picture nobody's seen. That's the highest level of foul where nobody has an opportunity to rebut it or understand it. If you say, hey, I think I saw a study about moths, everyone should take that with a grain of salt, and that gives somebody an opportunity to be like, well, no, actually, here's that study about moths and they're doing fine. So there's no, the better your evidence and the more clearly it's presented and the more opportunity the public has to understand and rebut it, the better. The only clear fouls are decision for reasons that other people aren't privy to, that the record isn't privy to.
Yeah, and I guess I would also add that staff has built a text amendment based on, we have a findings document based on certain panel input and Board of County Commissioner input. If you found that you wanted to deviate from those staff amendments, which of course is in your purview, and it was based on some circumstance, it's that circumstance, it's that evidence. Why are you relying on it as instead of an anecdotal, remark, providing the basis to maybe change the amendments in a significant way? It would be far more appropriate and defensible to say, let's keep the record open. I want to bring in this report, or let's keep the record open because we heard some amazing testimony. I'd like to get more information about why lighting is so impactful. If we use your example on moss, then you get that information and it gives you the ability to say, you know what, that was persuasive or not. And I would like the Planning Commission during deliberations to consider the following. So that's putting more context to kind of Will's remarks about, procedure and, personal information or personal experiences. But that's how I always kind of conceptualized it.
Great. Anybody else? All right. I think we're ready to move on to staff comments.
Yeah, thank you. So lots of continuation from things I've previously mentioned to you. The objective was to be buttoned up in a timely manner for those modules that you've touched. No appeals anticipated at this time, fingers crossed. And we've got, I'll be returning to the board as we discussed at your previous meeting to do a work plan update and have them think about some projects that might be undertaken in the coming months. Something new has to do with solar rulemaking. So as of today, I think, I don't know if the meeting's complete, but DLCD has worked through a process for solar siting in Eastern Oregon. And these new rules provide a new lane through which solar projects can be approved, relatively fast-tracked in Eastern Oregon. And it looks like that those rules are going to be adopted in a way that they were, the counties were opted in by default. Which would allow solar generators to apply under certain circumstances under reduced regulatory burden. One of the things that we'll be bringing forward to the Board of County Commissioners will be a discussion to see if they want to opt out of that and preserve current discretionary process for siting solar facilities. So I'll bring you more information about that in the future. I just wanted to acknowledge that that's something that's coming out at state level, hot news of the day, and I expect to hear tomorrow how that turned out. And
So is that likely to come before planning commission and or a hearing process to decide?
not, it's
Okay.
specifically designed so that without any local action, by default, solar generators could take advantage of these new regulatory pathways to give less local discretion for the siting of solar systems. We expect that the board may have some hesitancy about being opted in by default because of a number of special considerations, including sage-grouse habitat, wildlife connectivity issues, wildlife corridors, habitat areas, some of the urban reserve interfaces, some of our high-value farmland, agricultural lands, metolius areas of concern, and also some of the specific areas that are affected by this. So the fast track legislation includes some information about locations beyond a certain distance from a high voltage line. So I suspect that the board will at least be interested in thinking about preserving, given the remaining areas that are eligible for this, they're relatively related areas. And so I think there may be some interest in preserving the existing discretionary regulatory pathway, but that'll be a discussion before the board. And again, this is a little bit jumping the gun because those rules are going to be today.
Any more? Okay, Peter.
Couple of things. I think it was acknowledged on the earlier today by the chair. It looks like the wildfire hazard map has been repealed. It's just awaiting the governor's signature. That's Senate Bill 83. Senate Bill 75, I believe, got a third reading today by the House. So Senate Bill 75 would remove the fire hardening requirements that were required for rural accessory dwelling units. So if Senate Bill 75 passes, Will and his team, I think we probably talked about this 2 weeks ago, are going to need to go back to the board and say, we no longer have a wildfire hazard map. That was the nexus for fire hardening rural accessory dwelling units. We would recommend amending the code to align with state law. So we're tracking Senate Bill 75. I went into great length, probably unnecessarily 2 weeks ago, but at the time I felt it was important to give you context of Senate Bill 1154. I'm not going to go into the depth of it, but this is related to declarations of groundwater areas of concern or worst case, groundwater management areas. So Senate Bill 1154 is up for a third reading tomorrow, so it still has life and something on the area of groundwater concern that could potentially apply to Southern Deschutes County. So I just want to let you know that legislation is still technically active. Sine die, the end of the legislature is this weekend, so not much time left. And then lastly, Commissioner Cyrus, this is in your backyard. There was a applicant initiated plan amendment zone change for a Goal 4 exception near Sisters. Mackenzie Meadows is the applicant. Day before yesterday, so plan amendment zone change out of the forest use zone with an exception, reasons exception demonstrating that the forest use requirements did not apply, to convert it into a multiple use agricultural 10 zone. The applicant acknowledged that they're really interested in being considered for a Sisters urban growth boundary amendment process, but are not promoting or considering urban uses. Anyway, hearings officer recommended approval of that plan amendment zone change. The board, it looks like the hearing before the Board of County Commissioners is going to be scheduled on August 6th. So there was a joint work session yesterday with City Council, Sister City Council and the board. Staff did mention that recent recommendation, plan amendment zone changes involving farm or forest use zone land. Hearings officers do not make the final decision under our code, and I think consistent with state law, the Board of County Commissioners has to do that. So in any event, this is a very big recommendation as it pertains to Sisters. I think the property, do you remember, is it like 60 acres? It's the justification, I think, for Sisters urban growth boundary amendment is around 250 acres. So I think it might be a 50-acre property near the high school.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. It basically runs to the west of the high school, to the north, it borders Tollgate.
Yeah. Okay.
So essentially, if it were to come within the urban growth boundary, it would link Sisters to Tollgate.
Okay. So as you can imagine, a lot of community interest. So that was the last item I wanted to share with you in terms of a very complex, controversial proposal in the Sisters community scheduled for month after next. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Nicole, did you have anything?
I just have a couple of updates for you. The board held first reading of the Deschutes County 2040 plan on reconsideration this past Wednesday, just yesterday. So the second reading is planned for late July. The board's taking a bit of a summer break, so that's the earliest we could get back to them. The board also yesterday had a presentation on the status of sage grouse from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and a professor from Oregon State University. So you can view that in the past meetings at deschutes.org/meetings, or I can send you a link as well if you'd like. But some interesting information about the status of sage grouse populations in the Brothers area specifically, which is the primary area of Deschutes County that's researched and monitored. Also, I wanted to follow up on the temporary hardship dwelling amendments that the Planning Commission reviewed earlier this year. The board did approve those on May 21st, and they're effective on August 19th. The board carried forward the Planning Commission's recommendations. There are no changes at the board level. And thank you very much for an efficient hearing and meeting this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Commissioner Williams.
I don't really have anything. What I just had like a quick question for Peter, because he said that the planning department might or would recommend also amending our fire hardening for ADU. Is there a chance that the board would consider, because we have to keep the minimum of what the county recommends, but we can go stricter with respect to that? Is there any chance that the county would or the board would recommend that we keep with the fire hardening recommendations for ADU buildings?
Yes, Commissioner Williams, that is a great question, and one that I think Will touched on 2 weeks ago. We will be returning likely the third week of July. Will and his team will be engaging the Board of County Commissioners on a host of issues. One of them will likely be, in light of Senate Bill 83, whether the Board of County Commissioners is interested in re-engaging a public process, having some community conversations that talks about, and this legislation is built into Senate Bill 83. It is permissive that local governments can develop their own. I think this is accurate. You could establish essentially your own wildland urban interface and identify those rural residential areas that would be that would warrant fire hardening for new construction. And so the Senate Bill 83 also has provisions on defensible space, but as written, it requires the state fire marshal develop a model code that is available to local governments if they want to utilize it. And then if you've been reading separately, I think the legislature is close to identifying some funding for wildfire mitigation in certain priority areas. So, but Commissioner Williams, to your point, I think staff understands the importance of asking that very question, whether the board would like to consider, starting with a scope of work and a public process, a conversation that could then inform some amendments that the Planning Commission would consider first in their role as citizen advisory body for specific hardening regulations in the rural county.
Thank you. And I'm all good. Good to see everyone.
All right. Commissioner Stuckkamp.
No comment besides thanks for another good meeting.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Kelly,
No comment. Thanks, everyone.
Commissioner Karas,
Great meeting. Thanks.
Commissioner Hovkamp,
Nothing additional. Thanks.
and you're up.
No comment other than I'm really happy to see dark skies, so I look forward to that public hearing. Thank you.
Great. And I'd just like to thank everybody, and it's one of our record meetings as far as time. It's an hour and 10 minutes, and we got a lot covered. So thanks, everybody, and meeting's adjourned.
Happy July 4th.